You need to... Yes, quickly. Yeah, I hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Repetitive Head Trauma Seminar, hosted by Marsh and Macquarie University. I'm Dean Mumm, one of your hosts, a former Wallaby and current risk advisor for Marsh Insurance. I'd also like to introduce my co-host for the day, Dr. Rowena Mobbs.
Thank you, Dean. It's great to be here, isn't it? And well done last night, State of Origin, eh? My name's Rowena Mobbs. I'm a cognitive neurologist proudly at Macquarie University. It's fabulous to have you online and fabulous to be here today. Dean, I think we've got quite a lineup.
We do. There's plenty of people, so I'm going to start with a few acknowledgements because we do have some fantastic guests joining us. First of all, the Honourable Victor Dominello, MP, Member for Ryde, Minister for Customer Service. Professor Patrick McNeil, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences here at Macquarie University. Mr Walter Kmet, CEO Macquarie University Hospital. Marsh National Sports Manager, Kirsten Mills. Clinical Associate Professor Michael Buckland, Head of Department of Neuropathology at RPA, and Executive Director of the Australian Sports Brain Bank. We've got CEOs, directors, chief medical officers and senior managers from various sporting agencies and services. Also with us today are senior industry representatives, medical practitioners, researchers and academics. Rowena, we've got a few supporters to thank as well.
We surely do. Apart from Marsh Insurance, we've got GE Healthcare, Glio Diagnostics, Synaptive Medical, Australian Sports Brain Bank, Fujitsu, Men of League, and I'd like to put in a special mention to the Macquarie Uni team who's helped produce this, Brenton Hamdorf, Courtney Sullivan and Ian Brew. Thank you so much. A little bit of housekeeping. This seminar is recorded. A survey link will be posted on the chat at the end of the seminar, and we will be hosting 3 Zoom breakout sessions, so please hold on the line afterwards that you can contact us one-on-one and have a chat. Today we're going to hear from stories of both the injured and the families of the injured. Whatever discoveries we make today together, we are inspired by our Indigenous colleagues and the traditional owners of the land on which we study.
Yama Warami Willimbimbi Warami Midiga Warami Daruga Nura Warami Walameta Warami Wanura Walametical. We welcome you on behalf of the ancestors, and we acknowledge all of the elders past and present. We acknowledge all Aboriginal nations of Australia. We walk together on this land and we pay respects to the traditional owners and those who have walked before us. We acknowledge the land's history, yesterday's, today's and tomorrow's. The land speaks of the Darug and their dreaming. We can still feel, hear and see the ancient songlines across this beautiful campus. This land has held many gatherings for centuries, since the Darug's first sunrise some 60,000 years ago. We belong to the land. We are many nations, many people, coming together, looking after this country and respecting each other. We stand here together at Macquarie on sacred ground. As the Wallamai navigate the mangroves and find their pathways, so shall you here at Macquarie. Warami, welcome to Wallamata Juju Go Yanu.
I'd now like to warmly welcome the Honourable Victor Dominello MP, Minister for Customer Service, Member of the Legislative Assembly, Member for Ryde. Victor is a Senior Minister in the New South Wales State Government and has held various portfolios over the last decade, including Aboriginal Affairs, Innovation and Finance. He was appointed the inaugural Minister for Customer Service following the 2019 election. The first of its kind in the country, this ministry aims to put the customer and the citizen first in the design of all government services. Victor firmly believes that the use of real-time data, digital innovation and technology are integral to the delivery of modern public services. And we warmly welcome him today. We're extremely thankful for his time. Minister Dominello. Yep. Minister Dominello, I'm awfully sorry to interrupt you. It seems that you may be muted and we'd love to hear your message. So I'd ask if you could very kindly start again and forgive us. Forgive us. Thank you.
No, I'm the one seeking the forgiveness because I did not press my mute.
All good.
But good to see you. I begin by acknowledging country, pay my respects to elders, both past and present. One of the things that we've learned out of COVID was that we need to value research and development a whole lot more than just a plaything on the side. Governments really, and governments, industry, academia need to really come together and put a lot more effort into critical areas. As we've seen, the whole world has literally spent trillions and trillions of dollars this year trying to come up with a vaccine in relation to COVID. But there are so many more icebergs, as I call them, that are out there, particularly in the health space, that we need to work together to unpack, to understand more of. And the impacts of repeated traumatic head injury, particularly as it relates to dementia, is clearly one of those areas. You know, in a land where we idolise sports, and particularly contact sports, this should be, in many ways, a testbed for the world in terms of understanding the consequences of repetitive injury and the long-term impact of that. I am very, very focused on data and digital, and I've even had my brain mapped because I want to see what's happening inside this skull of mine. But I realise that in the years ahead, this is where we can leverage our position here as a leader on the world stage. I'm about to give a Bradfield address tomorrow, painting out the future for New South Wales, and I talk significantly about the diagnostics and the new techniques that we're using, particularly around e-health. So I'm really hoping that out of today's event, we have a deeper appreciation for the work that needs to be done, particularly by the conveners of today. But more importantly, how we should take a lead role, how we should own the responsibility here in Australia as in many ways the contact sports capital to really drive this reform and understanding. So again, thank you for having me. I'm sorry about the earlier glitch. I wish I was there, but I'm stuck in Parliament today in no doubt having very, very educated debates here in New South Wales Parliament in the bear pit. Anyway, again, wish you every success, and I look forward to hearing the outcomes.
Thank you, Minister Dominello. I think all of us have had a Zoom mute issue in recent times, so you're certainly not alone there, and we appreciate your time. It's really fascinating to hear from your end and having your support in making New South Wales a leader in brain health and using technology and diagnostics to do that. I'd like to introduce now Professor Patrick McNeil, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Medicine and Health and Executive Dean, Faculty, Medicine, Health and Human Sciences here at Macquarie University. Professor McNeil.
Thanks very much, Dean, and thanks to the Minister for his introduction and comments. It's great to have your participation, Minister, and we know that you're very fond of Macquarie University because you're our local member and we're very fond of you. I'll just explain my position at Macquarie University. I have a couple of roles. One is I'm the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences, and that's a faculty where our researchers, including Rowena, do their work. And it includes medicine, a lot of health professions, psychology, so really everything that is needed to solve the problem we're talking about today. And my second role is leadership role as the Managing Director of MQ Health. Macquarie University is unique in being the only university that runs its own health service here on campus, MQ Health. And our motto of our work is Heal, Learn, Discover. So those three words tell you how we integrate the research we do, the discoveries we make, with learning and with practice where we care for our clients and our patients. And the thing we do is bring those three things together. And I think we've got some very good examples of what we do both on the academic side and the clinical side. Probably one of the strongest ones is in neurosciences, the topic we're talking about today. It's a real research and clinical strength here at MQ Health and Macquarie University. People may not know that we run Australia's biggest and most integrated motor neuron disease clinic and have one of the biggest research programs in that area, which is another neurodegenerative disease. We've also got a very active research centre in dementia, which ranges from very, very fundamental discovery research using models of dementia in mice, right through to integrated research studies looking at what we call pre-dementia, or people who are at risk of dementia, and trying to find those key biomarkers and other measures to identify patients at risk and then start to look at treatments. So the topic of today, which is repetitive head trauma, is another one of those neurological conditions that fits with Macquarie's value set of ambition and innovation. This is a really emerging area that is desperately needs more interrogation, more discovery, more care, because it's increasingly being common. And so I'm really looking forward to the discussions today at this seminar. So once again, welcome to Macquarie University. Thank you, Minister, and also our sponsors. And I'll pass back now to Rowena.
Thank you very much, Professor McNeil, for those insightful comments encouraging our work here at Macquarie University. I think certainly the words heal, learn, discover have resonated with me, as I know it does with all the staff and students here. So I hope that we can move forward very well together nationwide on this topic. It's very important. And speaking of important, we have now two Australian icons. They're certainly my heroes from childhood. We've got Jeff Fenech, world boxing champion, Olympian, and Steve Blocker-Roach, NRL great. I hope you enjoy this video.
Brent Todd in there to do some heavy work as Roach carries a couple of the Kiwi forwards with him. Inside New Zealand territory now. In this third test match, blindside goes Sterling. Running
on American soil, the undefeated Jeff Fenech. And his opponent across the ring on my left, fighting out of the red corner is...
To be honest, I always wanted to be what Blocker was. I wanted to be a rugby league player. I got into boxing by accident, and I was able to do amazing things. I went to the Olympics in '84. I was world champion in '85. I was the quickest person ever to win 3 world titles undefeated. My record was only broken last year.
Well, I was just a young fella growing up and idolising, Bobby Fulton and Graham Langlands and all those sort of guys that were from Wollongong, where I originated from, and just watching all those guys and thinking one day, I'd love to play in the same sort of arena as those guys.
Oh, well, I can see my opponents tiring and hurting, and I want to finish the fight. I want to knock him out. Of course, I'm proud to win, but I'm not proud of hurting anybody anymore.
I love being in that team environment. I love going away on tours, and I love being around blokes who had the same sort of ambition as yourself, but just the fun times, the mateship.
You're simply the best. Better than all the rest.
After you look, after you
No, she's beautiful. What sort of stage do you think? Oh, I'm going to throw that white cow in now.
Yeah, because I've seen presentations. I've seen some of my close friends, and I kind of think to myself, wow, there are guys I used to box, Steve. I used to punch their heads in every day. We used them as punching bags. And look, today, I might sound fine that, but there are days, Block, that I do something and 30 minutes later forget it. Or I organise to do something at 12 o'clock and it's 11:30 or quarter to 12, it's 12:05. God, I'm supposed to be somewhere. I just forget. I mean, look, I don't want to put anybody else in that position. So we love this, but I mean, we think that's great, but I don't know if it really is. That's what we've done. That's what you've done in the day.
It was state of origin in those days. That's how it was. It was sort of get or get got. That if you were playing for Australia or you were playing in a state of origin, you were expected to try and take the opposition on, and that was just, I don't know, that was just part of it.
You're expected to inflict hurt. We're in the hurt game.
Well, it's pretty hard to explain because you don't really remember. I got asked the question a lot of times: how many concussions did you have? And it's hard to remember. But then the question was put to me: how many times did you see, like the white dots in front of your head, in front of your eyes? Well, that would happen quite regularly, if not every week. So I don't know. The other thing for me too is denial. I was in denial for a long time. Just forgetting things, and my wife Kathy actually noticed it, but she never said anything to me because she wanted me to come to her and say, look, I'm having a few problems, whatever, memory and all that sort of stuff, and talking sentences and like forgetting words during what you're trying to talk.
But the thing that really upsets me is, like I said, there are so many other people who just played second grade or third grade or reserve, and they need help as well.
I don't want to see people suffer. I mean, I've got a lot of mates who have had a lot of concussions and all that sort of stuff, and to see them with their families and to see them not even wanting to get out of bed to go and to do a job. I mean,
I'll tell you why it's so important. Let me tell you why. Because it's quite simple that if something happened to Blocker Roach, or if something happened to Mario Fennick, or to Benny Elias, we're all aware of it and we're alert to that. But when it happens to Joe Bloggs while he played second grade, nobody cares about it. Macquarie University cares about everybody, and that's the reason why I'm sitting here. We talk about suicide and we talk about helping a mate and talking to people. There's more to it than that. We've just got to try to make it as good as we can and look after the fighters. When I think of this fight, I think of total neglect from Jeff Horn's trainer. I thought that, asking him questions and letting him cop what he was copying. I'd like to think that the way I'd like to correct this is I'd like to put his trainer in the ring and let somebody punch him in the head so many times and see what it's like.
I thought the towel should have been thrown into the third round.
We need funding. We need the people who have made all the money out of you guys to give something back.
The other thing we've got to do is try and work out how we can afford to help those other people that can't afford to help themselves. That's the thing.
And that's the thing that upsets me the most for winners is we can afford to help. The NRL make millions of dollars. They do a couple $1 billion deal with the TV. You mean to tell me they can't give some of that money to look after some of these people, to help Macquarie University? When I look at it, it's sad. We just need to have a better legislation. We need to have better people that allow these people to be trainers and referees and officials as well, because mate, the referees in some of the fights over the last few months have been just as bad as the trainers because they've let them go on as well.
Collision sports and physical sports like boxing, I don't see how we're going to stop the collision. I don't see how we're going to stop.
I mean, I think the whole thing needs to be looked at, and as well as just the competing on game day or on fight night, we've got to also think about our training techniques and making sure that these young guys aren't getting hurt as they're growing up and getting concussed.
We see it a lot now in rugby league too, now during the training. Like a lot of people only see the game day, as you mentioned, the game day where people actually go there and watch people play, but they have scrimmage every week. Scrimmage is like going at a game, opposing your teammates and playing against your teammates. And the instructions from the coaches and the people who are doing it is you've got to go as hard as you can.
Until everybody's under the same banner and doing the same thing, we're always going to have people trying to take shortcuts or people cheating, people getting away with things that because they want to win.
I'd like to do it. I'd like to do it like if I was going to do it privately and just have no fanfare really about it, Yeah,
well, I've done it, but I haven't done it for fanfare. But I'm not sure they're going to find much in my block.
They probably won't look like mine anyway.
I've always thought,
Once you face it and you go and get the tests and you do all the things that you're supposed to do, it's a weight off your shoulder, and you can see the relief in your family. Even I've got 3 sons, my wife talks to my sons about this sort of stuff too, and they tread around me even better now. Do you know what I mean? Like they understand that I know about what's going on, so it's a relief for the whole family. And they're the people you've got to think about. Like if anything ever happened to me and I'm gone, you leave your family there, to pick up the pieces, and that's not a good thing.
How good was that? I love hearing from 2 of Australia's greats, sporting greats, not only reflecting on their past and what they feel about that, but more importantly, the care they show for the current and next generation, and particularly for those outside the spotlight. I think all of us are involved from some sort of altruistic approach where we want to see everyone taken care of and at least aware of what the risks are. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Warren McDonald, Chief Medical Officer for Australian Rugby Australia, I should say. is a former doctor of mine at the Wallabies, and he's a terrific bloke, and I know he took care of me, and it's nice to know that he's in a position where he takes care of everyone in Rugby Australia, every player there. So, Dr. Warren McDonald.
Good afternoon, my name is Dr. Warren McDonald. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Rugby Australia. I've been asked to present today on the state of play in rugby, and by that I am presenting a very brief overview of the identification and on-field management processes for sports-related concussion in rugby. There's been an evolving proactive approach to concussion identification and management from all sports in recent years, driven by the sports themselves, both national and international governing bodies, but also driven independent of sports by collaborations such as the Concussion in Sport Australia collaboration between the Australian Institute of Sport, Sports Medicine Australia, the Australasian College of Sports and Exercise Physicians, and the Australian Medical Association. And this collaboration has produced a position statement and working documents which are updated regularly as the science evolves and freely available at the website listed. Within rugby, we have several examples of the evolution of processes around on-field identification and management, and I'm going to focus on two processes today. Firstly, the World Rugby Head Injury Assessment process and the Rugby Australia Blue Card process. World Rugby Head Injury Assessment process commenced in 2012, and the process has been constantly refined over the years since then based on a constantly building research database. I think it's important to note that this process has limited access, and it's only for high performance teams, as I've listed on this slide. But importantly, it's not used in the general community, and certainly not in club rugby, in junior rugby, or in schools rugby for anyone aged 18 or under. And the process at these levels of the game is what is known as recognise and remove. So the process is actually a three-stage process. Most people are aware of, or many people are aware of the first stage of the process, which is an off-field in-game assessment, which lasts for a mandatory 12 minutes and is a standardised process, so that the HIA used in the UK is the same as Australia, is the same as South Africa, is the same as in Argentina. But there are two subsequent steps in the process. A same-day post-game assessment and a third assessment undertaken 36 to 40 hours post-game. The diagnosis of concussion can be made at any time in this process, but concussion can't be excluded until all stages of the assessment process are completed. And access to the HIA process requires World Rugby approval, as I've already said, and is linked to a set of World Rugby player welfare standards. It's linked to specific education for players, coaches, administrators and medical staff. And it's linked to research, which, as I noted above, has been undertaken for the 8 years that it's been running, and which guides refinement of the process. So there have been several significant outcomes of the head injury assessment process over the last few years. Firstly, there is a consistent approach to the initial management of concussion across the world, which essentially involves a repeated multimodal assessment. Secondly, there's a consistency of what is classified as concussion in rugby around the world, which again is good for management, but also in terms of research. And then thirdly, and most importantly, there's been a significant reduction in the number of players left on the field who were subsequently diagnosed with concussion. Back in 2011, this number was 56%. In the 2019 data, which has not been published yet, that number is well less than 10%. Obviously, in an ideal world, we want that to be 0%. So let's now turn to a process that's been used here in Australia over the last few years in our community game, and that is the blue card, which is a card that the referee has, in which the referee may order a player to be removed from the field of play if, in the opinion of the referee, they have either a confirmed or a suspected concussion. And this process was first trialled in 2017 and then applied nationally in 2018. It's a process that applies to all community rugby from under 13s and older, and is essentially a public acknowledgement of a head injury having occurred and being managed appropriately. Significantly, this process doesn't change the laws of the game, as the referee has always been the final arbiter of who is allowed to stay on the field. But it's involved a lot of education of players, coaches, match officials, medical staff, administrators, the general public, and particularly doctors. And I guess the final point about it is that it's a translation of concussion procedures and processes to the community level of the game. So we have processes that not only apply to the high performance end, but also to the community end. So as I noted, the referee can use the blue card to remove a player if they suspect concussion. Importantly, the referees are not diagnosing concussion, but if they suspect that a concussion injury has occurred, they can remove the player from the field of play, and that player does not return that day, which then triggers an off-field process, including a mandatory minimum stand-down period and medical assessment. And we have a central recording process of incidents that allows us to analyse statistics. So the general principles of the blue card are that we are attempting to establish a collaborative approach to the management of concussion. In other words, all parties are responsible for the appropriate management of an injured person, whether you are a coach, a player, an administrator, a match official, or medical or first aid staff. The management of the process occurs at the competition manager level, but difficult cases or cases that cause controversy can be referred to the Rugby Australia staff, and specifically my role as Chief Medical Officer, or our concussion consultant can have their opinions sought in the case of difficult cases. And then finally, there have been a couple of paradigm changes that are at play. Firstly, diagnosed or confirmed concussion and suspected concussion are treated identically in this process, and so that any player presenting with signs or symptoms of concussion in the presence of a potential head injury are considered to be suffering from concussion unless an alternative diagnosis can be provided. As I noted at the start of this overview, this is a very brief summary of just a couple of things that have been done within the sport of rugby to improve the on-field identification and management of concussion over the last few years. There is certainly a lot more to this story, and there's certainly a lot more information around the things I've discussed today. So you can see that the World Rugby website, the Rugby Australia website, and the Concussion in Sport Australia website are all sources of very good information if you wish to find out a bit more. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Warren McDonald, for clearly a very detailed expert presentation on concussion. I know that you've been one of the strong leaders in this field of research and care for patients and players, so thank you very much for those insights. Now I'd like to propose a repetitive head trauma initiative. 100 years ago, things were very different, of course. We didn't have dementia around so much. So this is Bondi Beach circa 1900, at which time the life expectancy for women was 51 and for men was 47. These children would have faced famine, war, infections. So life was very different, and around that time Alzheimer's was only just being reported in the literature. But now we have a high rate of Alzheimer's as we get older. So when you're in your 80s, you've got a 1 in 5 chance of having a degree of dementia, the most common type of which is Alzheimer's. So this is a condition of our times, and sadly my own mother Carolyn had Alzheimer's disease in her 70s, so I well understand the marathon of dementia. Where are we today as far as, our health is fantastic. You know, of course, we've got a much longer life expectancy and quality of life in many areas around the world. We're now seeing, very pleasingly, the equality of women in elite sport and also right through the grassroots through to grade levels. But we're also still seeing the ramifications of concussion in these contact and collision sports, and of course it's very topical, as it should be, I think, and we're all calling for change and also putting our minds together to see how we can do things a little better. Who's getting injured? Who are we talking about as far as repetitive head trauma and a risk for CTE? Well, CTE has been demonstrated in a 25-year-old rodeo rider and in these sports listed here. So there's an expanding literature on this. You'll note there the good work of Professor Michael Buckland, recently identifying CTE in our own sports and triggering this debate. But CTE applies also to non-sporting head trauma. And what I note is that the literature is dominated by sporting-related concussion and head trauma, but the majority of head traumas are non-sporting. So we need to deeply consider this as we go forward. We see repeated head trauma in defence with blasts or rocket firing, for example, construction industries, farmers, so they often get a knock from livestock, falls from quad bikes, ladders, working with steel, for example, mining. And then we see a group of patients who have falls, and I'm very familiar with these patients in my neurology clinic, those who are visually impaired or blind, those who are frail, epileptic, alcohol use disorder patients, and those with Parkinson's disease, to name a few. So how are we testing them? Well, in our neurology clinic, what you may not realise is your doctor's probably analysing you from the minute you get up out of the chair, or a good neurologist will. It's the specialty of people, understanding the person and observing their every movement and their every social interaction before we do go on and do our tests like MRI and neuropsychology testing shown here. So it's really putting together that puzzle, all of those pieces to understand the person and understand, are there any concerns over dementia or decline? As you already know, I'm a big sports fan, and I grew up in Canberra with all the codes, followed rugby. I didn't play it, it wasn't the done thing at that time, but I did go on to represent my state in 4 sports, and I represented Australia in fencing and modern pentathlon, so I do know a little bit about what athletes are going through, as do quite a few members of our team. And I grew up with a neurosurgeon father as well, Dr. Ray Newcomb, who helped lead this work. He led the NHMRC report into repeated head trauma and football injuries, as well as in boxing. And at that time, they called for a central fund for research into the prevention and management of head and neck injuries, particularly a uniform approach to concussion. So here we are again today, and I'm sure that we can do better together and really forward this work. And at that time, there was concern over, could there be cognitive impairment resulting from repeated head trauma? The Kiwis may beat us to it, as perhaps as usual. So we're really inspired by what they're doing. They have a different system, a different insurance set up for concussion, of course, but they have this Rugby Smart program and starting to focus on good concussion education and good management and protocols. And Professor Buckland and I attended the launch of the New Zealand Sports Brain Bank last year, which was welcomed by some All Blacks, as seen here. So what are we doing in Australia? Well, at Macquarie University, we have the SNAP CTE study, which is aiming to recruit widely 1,300 participants over 5 years with analysis of biomarkers, neurological features, neuropsychology, neuro-ophthalmology, which we will hear about, neurophysiology and neuropathology to link it all and give us the final answer. We're measuring the patient's IQ, and we're measuring their recent memory, given the reported concerns of their family and themselves. And we're comparing predicted and actual memory scores. So what are we finding? Well, these groups are above average intellect. We're finding the sportsmen are smart, they've got their sporting intelligence. But we are concerned about some difficulties of learning and retention. So they have cognitive impairment, which is highly significant on these measures listed here and very much reduced relative to their predicted levels, although I note that this is yet to be published. We also are seeing an early loss of insight. So insight is the ability to perceive one's own behaviour and personality. It's critical for the maintenance of social connection, and a loss of insight is one of the core features of all types of dementia. It's one of the things that are a red flag in the neurologist's mind, and certainly I'm getting this red flag with these patients. The repetitive concussive injury we have found associates with a 40-year earlier onset of loss of insight. And the resultant economic loss and excessive burden on caregivers from this could be very serious. So the conclusions of the SNAP CTE studies so far, soon to be published, is that players show evidence of acquired cognitive impairment. The testing was consistent with descriptions of cognitive decline, and players need assistance. What do we do? What's the solution? Well, I think it's the National Repetitive Head Trauma Initiative coming together in a stage 1 cooperation, as we are starting today, for collaboration, hopefully funding and technology working together to see where we get to. With the research, we need to look at the risk of CTE, really understand that, but I'm proposing as well a repeat head injury assessment, or RHIA, not just an HIA, which is will be evidence-based, perhaps an expert-led, perhaps neurologist, sports physicians, and in the older cohorts, geriatricians. And this will be linked to the Neuropathology Registry at the Australian Sports Brain Bank as a proposal. So here we see a diagram showing the HIA with the purple, but an RHIA clinic beyond that, so sending our players under protocol to these specialties, can further assess the cognition by those who are really experienced in that and detect those sensitive changes of memory, mood and behaviour. And this will feed into the research clinics thereafter. So much like we have a mental health break in our community as very much an accepted thing these days, perhaps we ought to be having a brain break and sending them to specialist clinics and really allowing that time, assessment and management. Here at Macquarie, we're very keen on innovative solutions, and here's some of the work of Paul Salmon and Bianca DeWitt looking at gaming technology. And there's new technology all the time. Synaptive Medical now have a 0.5 Tesla MRI, so theoretically portable, and certainly seems to be safe to be very close to it. And it's showing good images, you know, which are very close to what you can attain on a 3 Tesla. So we're watching this sort of technology very closely. So stage 3, once we have stage 1 and 2, we can move to innovative solutions. We can look at screening using video technology, replays, real-time field site assessments, and then eventually longitudinal assessments and longitudinal screening. A coordinated national registry, as has been called for on many occasions, coordinating data out of the emergency department, general practice, the specialties, and working out the biomarkers, which will then lead us to the cure and prevention stages. So leading to earlier diagnosis, early intervention, and hopefully prevention of CTE and repeat head trauma related conditions for the longevity of sports, because they're great. So thank you for listening. I'll be back soon with some more information. Dean.
Thanks, Rowena. Really interesting insight into what's going on the cutting edge of research, which with you guys here at Macquarie are. And I think from my end, you know, sport's so heavily publicised in this sense, but really it is a broader community issue. And there's many avenues that repetitive head trauma can come in. I think what is key out of there is an opportunity that exists to coordinate and collaborate on this across many areas around the repetitive head trauma, whether that's in mitigation or further longitudinal research.
I think so. We've all got our gig, all got our specialty, don't we? And I think we can really work together here.
Yeah, totally. Looking forward to it.
Yep.
Okay, I'd like to introduce our next video now. I'm really starting to feel like the only person that's in this room that's not a doctor. So there's a whole bunch of specialists here, and it's going to be very insightful to see what is going on in the clinical research space. So I'd like to introduce on the video Associate Professor Jennifer Batchelor at Macquarie University, Edmund Sorich, Director at Glea Diagnostics, Rowena's sister, Dr Virginia Newcomb, who's a neurointensivist at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge in the UK, Associate Professor Claire Fraser from Macquarie University, and all of the respective panellists or speakers here will provide their own insights into the signs and symptoms of repetitive head trauma and what to look out for and what you can do about it.
I've had a long-standing interest in traumatic brain injury and for many years have been working with individuals who have sustained a single traumatic brain injury. But the literature would suggest that repeated traumatic brain injury carries its own burden. Neuropsychology is essentially the study of the way different neurological symptoms affect a person's cognitive abilities, memory, attention, problem solving, etc., and their behaviour. We're finding with the players that we've been seeing who have a history of repeated traumatic brain injury that they're demonstrating very specific difficulties on measures of memory and in particular measures of the ability to encode information into memory. So that's a very specific aspect of memory and different from the memory deficits that you see in many other disorders which are characterised by rapid forgetting rather than a specific difficulty of the ability to encode information. I think the future of research in individuals with repetitive traumatic brain injury is trying to identify the individuals who are likely to be experiencing cognitive difficulties and behavioural changes and trying to improve health outcome through early identification.
Around 6 years ago, concussion came across my desk and I thought, like most people at the time, why is concussion a problem? People get knocked out in the football field all the time and they come straight back on. After some quick sort of research and a personal visit to Boston and speaking to Robert Cantu, I got quickly up to speed. Biomarkers are essentially what's happening at the coalface. If we can use the analogy of a canary in the cage, they're indicators of potentially what's happening and what's about to happen. Our markers, which are called microRNAs, actually, there's three things we found. Firstly, the microRNAs clearly discern mild TBI versus normal presentations. They also quantify injury, so it actually stratifies mild through to severe. And probably most excitingly, they provide a return to activity tool whereby we can determine if someone is actually safe to go back to do what they normally do. Prevention is better than cure. There's again mounting evidence that undiagnosed or untreated mild TBI does lead to CTE. So the quest is really now to validate biomarkers for both mild TBI and for CTE.
So I've been doing traumatic brain injury research for more than a decade now. So I first moved from Australia to the University of Cambridge to do a Masters in epidemiology, and then I had the opportunity to do a PhD. So I'm very interested in being able to predict those who will have a poor outcome after mild head injury. And so my current research is focusing on that using both biomarkers and neuroimaging in order to predict this. I would then hope, if we can actually work out who's going to have a bad outcome early on, to then perform trials so that we can intervene and hopefully prevent that poor outcome from occurring. So CTE to me is really part of the spectrum of traumatic brain injury, and it's just a repetitive mild head injury. So I think it's a really important area that we need to look at, but we should broaden it from just the sporting field and look at it as the whole spectrum of head injury. There are two key facts that we really need to take into consideration. The first is that mild head injury is a misnomer, so over 30% of patients who present to an emergency department will have ongoing symptoms even 2 years after their injury. And the second is that we need to take into account the other injuries that a patient might have. So not just the head injury, as that will have a huge impact on the eventual outcome of the patient. So I think mild head injury is often a forgotten injury because people can't see it. And yet it affects so many people around the world every year. And it can affect any of us, so from young to old. And can really be a life-changing injury. And so we do need to do more research so that we can better look after these patients so that more people have a good outcome.
I do neuro-ophthalmology, which is diseases of the eye and the brain and how they affect each other. And in my clinic, I was seeing a lot of patients who'd suffered from concussion, either acutely or in the past, who were having visual-related difficulties. Interestingly, about a third of the neurological pathways in the brain are related to vision, whether that's either processing what you're seeing or then actually controlling the eye movements. And what we started off by doing was looking at the measurements of what we call the retinal nerve fibre layer in the eye. And the retinal nerve fibre layer is actually a direct extension of the brain that can be visualised in the eye and directly measured, much easier than doing an MRI scan, for example. And what we found was that the players who'd had multiple concussions in the past were showing signs of thinning or damage in this area that could perhaps reflect what was going on in their brain. What we need to do now is to follow players or people who've had concussion forward and see what changes that we find early on are then a predictor of future trouble, whether that be related to their eyes, whether that be related to psychology or other neurological functioning. We don't want people to be afraid of playing sport because it has such great benefit for people's health, for team building, for making great friends. And so we want players to feel safe playing their sport, to know that they'll have the right diagnosis and treatment acutely and in the long term. So their parents, their family and friends don't need to be worried about the concussions that they get because we have the right research to guide their diagnosis, treatment and long-term management. If you have suffered from a concussion or a head injury and you're having ongoing issues, whether that's related to your vision, your balance, headaches, your mood, anything that worries you, there are now doctors available who have an expertise and an interest in this area, and we're more than happy to examine you, have a look and see how we can help.
I'm sure you'll agree that was absolutely fascinating to hear from those researchers, and I can't wait to see where this work goes in the next few years. I'd now like to welcome my good colleague, Associate Professor Michael Buckland. Michael is a senior neuropathologist and the head of department at Neuropathology, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, head of the Molecular Neuropathology Program at the Brain and Mind Centre, University of Sydney. And he's co-director at the Multiple Sclerosis Research, as well as the Australian Sports Brain Bank. And he's been an ever-inspiring colleague. I met Michael at the launch of the Australian Sports Brain Bank, so I'm looking forward to hearing his wonderful presentation. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Rowena. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today. So I've been given the task of actually talking about what is chronic traumatic encephalopathy and how do we diagnose it. So it's actually a neuropathological diagnosis. At this stage, the only way you can confidently diagnose CTE is examining the brain after death. And it's characterised by a distinctive pattern of an abnormal form of a normal protein in the brain, and that's called tau. So it's a distinctive pattern of abnormal tau protein accumulation in the brain. As I said, tau is a normal cellular protein. It's normally found in the nerve fibres and helps stabilise them. And abnormal tau accumulates in a variety of neurodegenerative diseases in addition to CTE. And the most common one would be Alzheimer's disease, where it accumulates along with beta amyloid, another abnormal protein. But there's a whole list of frontotemporal dementias that also accumulate tau. And some very unusual diseases such as post-encephalitic Parkinsonism, which is a disease thought to be due to an infectious agent and was highlighted in the movie Awakenings some time ago. Now, interesting, this disease seems to be an environmentally induced disease that turns out to be progressive and characterised by tau accumulation. And it has a lot of similarities in that way with CTE. CTE is thought to be an environmentally induced disease, induced by repetitive head knocks or repetitive brain injuries, and it appears to be a progressive disease characterised by tau deposition. So these are some of my favourite pictures. I always like microscope pictures. This is how tau looks like in a neuron on a standard stain. And it might be a bit hard to see there, but it's some purple stripes on the left of that cell in the middle. Now, there's a wide variety of techniques we can use to highlight tau, and this is one of the most well-used and well-known techniques. It's a silver stain, and tau is now being stained black by that silver stain in the panel in the middle. These days, a lot of modern laboratories, including our laboratory, use a tau antibody to stain the tau in the tissue. And that results in a brown stain, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there. That's staining tau in neurons, as well as in the background in the nerve fibres. CTE has gone through a few different names. Most people would agree that it was the first person that probably described it as punch drunk in 1928. And that was by a medical examiner, Dr. Harrison Martland in the US. He described a syndrome of cognitive problems, movement problems and mood problems in X boxes and named it punch drunk. It's gone through a variety of name changes over the years, but these days we know it as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. Now, prior to 2005, when CTE was described by Bennett Omalu in an ex-player of American football, there'd only been 42 cases of CTE reported in the medical literature. So while it was well acknowledged that it existed, it was very, very poorly studied disease. Subsequent to that, to 2005, there has been an explosion in research and understanding of some of the pathophysiology of CTE. It's really been synthesised by two publications out of the Boston University group in the USA. In this paper in Brain in 2013, as well as this paper in 2015-2016. And in these two papers, the pathological criteria for diagnosis of CTE at autopsy was laid out and then tested in a consensus meeting. And that's the criteria that we certainly use at the Australian Sports Brain Bank, as do many other groups across the world. And this is what it looks like in a slice of brain. And if you just look at that middle panel B, you can see what we're looking at is the brown stain. And the brown stain is accumulating in parts of that brain slice. It's really at the depths of the valleys of the brain. So we all know the brain has got a lumpy, bumpy surface, and the valleys, or the sulci of the brain, tend to be the place where the tau accumulates, and that's a very distinctive pattern for CTE. And higher power microscope images show the tau seems to accumulate around small blood vessels at the depths of those valleys. And it seems that vascular injury may be an important part of the etiology of CTE. This is one of our cases from the Sports Brain Bank, and I do apologise, there's actually one of my hairs on this slide, but it's a good scale bar. And you'll see here, you can see the lumpy, bumpy outline of the brain, and you can see that brown stain really accumulating at the depths of the valleys, or the depths of the sulci. And just for comparison, this is another donation to the Sports Brain Bank, but this person had Alzheimer's disease, and this is their tau stain. While there's a lot of tau there, you can see there's no accentuation at the depths of those valleys. It's a relatively uniform distribution of tau in the valleys and the crests as well. And at high power, this is another case from the Sports Brain Bank, and you can see on the top right, I've put some dots in to delineate the base or the depth of the valley, the sulci, and underneath that we have this irregular accumulation of tau in nerve cells and supporting cells and in nerve processes around blood vessels. So a very, very typical pattern of CTE. So what has been described in America, we are certainly seeing here identical pathology here in Australia and in Australian contact sports. Advanced CTE, there is more tau, but I wanted to just juxtapose two pictures here. On the left is severe CTE as it spreads over the surface of the brain, and it's got a very distinct pattern compared to Alzheimer's disease there on the right. So at the Sports Brain Bank, we've been operating for 2.5 or close to 3 years now. We have 13 brains examined to date from sports people, and I just wanted to very briefly show our work in progress, what we've found so far. So we found of those 13 brains, they're all donated or otherwise from sports people, or from a variety of contact sports or other sports as well. 8 of those 13 we've been able to diagnose CTE in them, and 5 of those have had Alzheimer's disease and not CTE, one with frontotemporal dementia. So when we look at an at-risk population here in Australia, in Australian sports, we're finding it easy to find CTE at autopsy. 2 things I just wanted to finish with. One of our cases was in a middle-aged male that passed away. He played rugby in high school and then he stopped. And in the few years before his death, he complained of some cognitive and emotional issues, as did his family. And despite what we would think of as a sort of a fairly normal exposure, this man had stage 2 CTE. We're also seeing it in young people, and this is one case we found in a player in his 30s. He played at an amateur and semi-professional level, but he had quite severe CTE. So we're seeing it in people that have an exposure just in high school, as well as in people that are quite young. So that's our website there. Please visit us and you can sign up for our newsletter for our updates. And yes, thank you again for the invitation to speak.
Thank you so much, Michael. So I think it seems neuropathology really is that window on the brain that we need at the end of the clinical work, and it's so great to have you involved in this pioneering work that you're doing. If someone's concerned about any symptoms or wanting to talk about pledging their brain, how do they go about that?
So the best thing is just to visit our website. Mm-hmm. There's a contact form there. There's a button to tick, to press if you want to get some paperwork about donating your brain, and we'd strongly encourage everyone to do that. At the moment, it's a real numbers game, and we've only just started to scratch the surface here in Australia. The way we're going to get good answers is through large numbers. So please, everyone, I encourage everyone, please pledge.
Okay, so we can ramp it up and really get to the bottom of things, understand the risks. So thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Ryan.
I'd now like to introduce our next pre-record. We've got GE Healthcare, a leading global medical technology and life sciences company, who are going to provide who are providing a broad portfolio of products, solutions and services to aid in the diagnosis, treatment and monitoring of patients and in the development and identification of biopharmaceuticals. So we're going to hear from Dr. Jerome Malla, MRI clinical science specialist from GE Healthcare, to take us through.
My name's Jerome Malla. I'm a neuroscientist and MRI clinical science specialist for General Electric Healthcare. So for about the last 15 years, I've been focusing on advanced MRI, specifically diffusion imaging in the context of concussion, or what some people call mild traumatic brain injury. So from the GE perspective, it all started with the GE NFL Head Health Challenge. It was a $100 million US partnership, and it was an open innovation challenge to study mild TBI. The challenge 1 was methods for diagnosis. Challenge 2 was the mechanics of injury. Many submissions and hundreds of subjects were scanned, mostly sports people, football players, and healthy control subjects. A major outcome was the development of new MRI technology with a focus of detection on mild TBI, and this led to the GE Signa 3 Tesla Premier. So the developments are focused towards the study of concussion. It has to have a higher gradient amplitude, as this equates to a higher resolution whilst maintaining signal-to-noise ratio. It also has to have a wide bore opening, as the person has to be comfortable without the feeling of being confined. The hardware was completely redesigned to provide this higher gradient strength, while also reducing its heating. By using this new hollow, water-cooled gradient design, the MR scanner is far more efficient and can maintain homogeneity for longer exams. This new technology is particularly important for the study of concussion, where damage is likely to be neuronal microstructure. That is, the new technology can provide images of very high resolution, and it can do it fast. Typically, brain MR scans of people suspected with concussion do not show anything clinically significant, and that's because the damage, if present, is likely to be smaller than what we can see on the scan. So by imaging smaller voxels, that is, higher spatial resolution, we can see the brain in more detail. You can use hypersense, compressed sensing, higher resolution in a shorter amount of time. Here's an example of using hypersense on a 3D time of flight, which we call a TOF. This is using our newly developed 48-channel dedicated brain coil. If there are very subtle regions of microscopic damage, then these will be detected using this combination of advanced hardware and software. These data were acquired using the whole brain 48-channel air coil in a Sigma Premier. DTI is a technique widely used to investigate whether there is any damage to microstructure after concussion. Here's another example. Note the very high level of detail and contrast, with the white matter going right up to the grey matter gyral crowns, as we can see in this image here. We can measure parameters such as flow, vessel diameters, pressure gradients, speed, and essentially this can be achieved in a single scan. So if there are cardiac implications as a result of concussion, then they are likely to be detected using this technology. Here are some visual examples of 4D flow. We also have a compact 3 Tesla MRI scanner. Head only, extremely high slew rate, which means faster scans with less noise. Only 12 litres of helium, so no quench pipe is required. The gradients are 80 amplitude and a huge 700 slew rate. It's very light as well, and it's easy to sight. This is a very high resolution DTI, 273 directions at 3 different B values. This is a very high resolution scan. So if there is microstructural damage to white matter fibres, which are often stretched and therefore damaged as a result of concussion, then this is likely to be detected using this technology. This really is a breakthrough in image quality. Using deep learning, the technology recognises true signal from a noisy signal and uses only the true signals for image reconstruction. This new technology is particularly important for the study of concussion, where damage is likely to be neuronal microstructure. That is, the new technology can provide images of very high resolution, and it can do it fast.
Thank you, Dr. Malla and GE, for their contribution to understanding CTE through imaging. There's some fascinating stuff there, and I think Rowena and her colleagues probably have a fair bit of learning to do on how to use that effectively in the diagnosis. In our next clip, I'd like to introduce a panel of elite sportsmen who over their careers experienced a number of head blows and are now seeing clear signs that indicate the long-term effects of repetitive head trauma. What are the challenges that loved ones face as well? We'll investigate this because we have a family member who's going to be explaining some of the issues that they're experiencing, and also we'll touch on some of the fears that parents might have in relation to repetitive head trauma in sport. So I'd like to introduce Dexter Dunworth, a retired professional boxer, and was the world record holder for being the oldest professional boxer in his time. Michael Lippman, who a former Australian rugby union player who played here in Australia but also played a number of tests for England in the UK. I'd like to introduce also his wife, Frances Lippman, to talk about some of the experiences from a family point of view. The panel discussion will be hosted by Peter Fitzsimons, who we all know as a long-time journalist and former Wallaby. So.
Hello, I'm Peter Fitzsimons, and this is a discussion about brain trauma among sports people and one spouse of a sports person. We're here at Macquarie University, where they've got a fascinating program looking at brain trauma, the effect that it has on sports people, how to deal with it, how to diagnose it, how to deal with it, what to do in the future, how Australian sport should sort itself out to minimise the impact of brain trauma. Brain trauma is not simply for people that have played for Australia or box professionally or whatever. It's for people playing subbies rugby, people playing doing amateur boxing. Is that it's not simply the knockouts that count. It's actually more troubling. Is I think they call it subconcussive impacts. How often you are getting that constant bang, bang, bang in terms of training and playing. But go on, just for pure knockouts, how many times were you knocked out?
Okay, knocked out none.
Oh.
Seriously concussed 6 times.
Right.
When you're going on about the subconcussions and getting hit, I would spar every Friday morning for at least 15, 16 rounds where you are getting, no matter how good you are getting hit a lot. And then that would intensify before having a fight. And then, so in that area of that subconcussion, continuous hitting in the head, you'll probably get hit in the head maybe, I don't know, over the course of 2-3 weeks before a fight, maybe a few hundred times, which is pretty intense.
Yeah.
Knocked out and concussed. I was thinking if I wasn't completely unconscious,
play on.
Play on, 100%.
So when I was playing, I mentioned being absolutely knocked out. It was against the French in the first test in 1990. Played on, and the coach put me back on. The doctor put me back on, and I wanted to play on, and I blame none of them. And, the doctor, we had the naive view that while boxers could get damaged, we were footballers, and that somehow our brain would know the difference between a gloved fist, which was dangerous, and football running into each other. Whereas in rugby league, they talk about that a tackle in a rugby league, one man running flat out at another man hit, I'm told, is the equivalent of being in a small car running into a brick wall at 30 kilometres an hour with your seatbelt on.
I know just from talking with friends and things like that, that in comparison to my schoolmates and friends that I have that have known me since we were at school together, that my memory is poorer than what it possibly should be.
Right.
And that concerns me.
Michael can still get quite moody and just... Sometimes you're walking on eggshells because you're just like, oh.
Francis, among wives and partners, or how are you going?
Yeah, well, we're just so lucky that Dr. Rowena has started a circle for partners and family members, and we had, we had a meeting, a get together a couple of weeks ago, and there were tears. There was a partner there that's had to leave. An ex-partner, because she had to separate from her husband, and but it was also really encouraging just to have a chat and to realise that you're not alone and there are other people going through the same things. Once we sort of talked about the concussion or possible CTE, the light it was like the light went on, and we had all these answers for everything that we'd been experiencing.
I think a lot of rugby league particularly will have real legal problems 20 years from now, because there'll be, and maybe rugby union, I don't know. I personally would have no legal case against the ARU because I was in the hands of doctors and coaches who did their best just as it wasn't known. The danger now, the legal danger for these federations and sports, is when they know and they still put them out there.
Michael's had quite a few cognitive tests, and he had a score of 77 out of 100 for this. And I looked up what that meant. I thought, oh, that sounds awesome. And I looked it up, and it was actually really concerning because it's at the stage of mild dementia. And I'm like, wow, this is what we're dealing with. And, Michael's only 40 years old.
So I think it'd be really important, just as most schools now keep gym records and things like that. I think all this sort of stuff needs to be documented at school when they're doing it, or junior level, whatever club, whatever. There needs to be a documentation of all kids on their medical side, so that if they come off with an injury, what was it? It's on a record. Then 30 years down the track, if it's like us, we're playing at Joey's, and all of a sudden, you're in the Waratahs or whatever, and you get injured or something, bang, they can put in. They said, oh yeah, he's had head knocks every 4 years, and then this one. So there's a pattern.
Dexter, that's an
paints
outstanding idea, and I can't wait to write it in a column under my name.
Well, there you go.
Thank you all for tuning in. I hope this has been useful. I don't know. I'm impressed. Everybody's frankness, and I go away knowing more about it than I did when we started. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you again to all of our guests. Peter Fitzsimons, signing off.
Thank you to those speakers. Not easy often talking about the fears that exist moving forward. As a former athlete myself in a contact sport, this definitely resonates for me. I also wanted to thank Francis in particular for addressing some of the fears of families and as they learn of CTE and other elements, and just acknowledge that the Circle CTE program that's available here at Macquarie University, which will allow people and family members to come and speak about some of the fears that they have. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Alexandra Vuthi, who's going to speak to us on the need for a national funding network for player care, research and legislation. Alexandra is going to be a pre-record because she's joining us from Lausanne in Switzerland, where she's an attorney at Libra Law. She graduated in Switzerland at a Masters in Sports Law and Judicial Professions from the University of Neuchâtel. I probably said that wrong, in Switzerland, so apologies, in 2007, and she passed the bar there in 2009. In addition to this, her international experience includes the completion of an LLM in sports law and common law and a PhD on the regulation of concussion in sport at the University of Melbourne. Welcome, Alexandra.
So good afternoon, everybody. Concussion in professional team sports, time for harmonized approach. This is the title of my PhD dissertation. My research is based on case studies. It proposed a harmonized solution to better regulate concussion across countries and sports. So let's start with a geographical overview of the concussion controversy in professional team sports, class action and CT cases. There were numerous sports governing bodies sued in the US and Canada during the past few years, including the National Football League, the National Hockey League, FIFA, USA Water Polo, and the Canadian Football League. Australian leagues are not spared either. There were several class actions announced in Australia, notably against the Australian Football League and the National Rugby League. And there are several individual lawsuits pending against clubs in Australia. With regard to CT cases, multiple CT cases have now been diagnosed in team sports, including American football, Canadian football, Australian rules football, football, ice hockey, baseball, rugby union, and rugby league. This is my research question. How can we reduce or prevent the public health risk of the occurrence of concussion, including its long-term health effects to athletes? And how can we reduce or prevent the consequent legal risk that belong to sport governing bodies? The originality and significance of my research. So far, people had only examined the concussion issue within one sport, within one country. I come up with a harmonized solution. This is the first time things have been put together and analyzed in a critical way. And my research is of great significance in terms of social, economic, and public health viewpoints, and not only for professional sports and professional team sports, but also for grassroots sports. And the scope of my research, so I focus on professional team sports. This excludes elite sports, grassroots sports, individual sports, but my proposal will be useful and will indirectly impact these fields. Structure, content, and methodology of my research. So in chapter 1, I have an introduction. Chapter 2, a medical overview. So I did interdisciplinary research. Chapter 3, national case studies. So my national case studies focus on the most relevant and affected countries in sports. So I focused on countries in sport which have a history of or potential for CT and mitigation. This includes, of course, Australia. In Chapter 4, I identified general trends. Chapter 5, I propose harmonized reform. So I didn't want to start from scratch. That's why I used the anti-doping system as a guiding thread. Chapter 6, a conclusion. And the methodology, I used mixed method, doctrinal, and comparative rule methods. My main findings in overall terms, so the controversy is expanding in terms of CT cases, in terms of class action. While sports governing bodies and to a lesser extent governments have recently made notable regulatory efforts, opportunities for further improvement exist. So right now governments are poorly involved and their action mainly focuses on grassroots sports and youth sports. So I really would like governments to step in because it's a public health issue. Current efforts are taking place within a framework that is too opaque, conflictive, defensive, and self-centered. And finally, harmonized reforms are urgently necessary given the ongoing nature of the controversy across countries in sport and the need for sport to operate internationally. My proposed reforms, so anti-doping as a main source of inspiration. There are several similarities between anti-doping and the regulation of concussion. The most obvious one is the public health aspect. But there are also differences between anti-doping and the regulation of concussion. For instance, anti-doping, it's about punishing. It has a disciplinary nature, whereas the regulation of concussion, it's more about prevention and compensation. So I had to be careful when I made comparison. And also I use match fixing and spectator violence as a subsidiary source of inspiration. So the main feature of anti-doping, as you probably know, there is a World Anti-Doping Agency, a World Anti-Doping Code, the WADA code, UNESCO Convention, which is binding for governments, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport. On this basis, I propose some reforms, a World Sport Safety Agency, an international standard on concussion, which could provide guidance for sports governing bodies regarding the rules of play, rules of the game, concussion management protocols, education, research, data collection, financial support to injured athletes, etc. UNESCO Convention for governments, again, like in doping, governments could fund research, education, and like in doping, governments could withdraw their financial support for non-compliant sports organizations. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport could intervene. It shouldn't be compulsory intervention, but it could be of interest, could be a good option. The benefits, so we go back to my research question. My reforms would reduce the risk of injury to professional athletes, reduce the risk of litigation. There would also be more transparency and collaboration between stakeholders. My reforms would bring impetus and power of constraint from governments. Right now, some sports organizations adopted a wait-and-see approach, maybe not in Australia, maybe not in the US, but in Europe, where I am right now. Positive effect on grassroots sports. Think about FIFA. If FIFA adopts new rules of play, it's going to trickle down to lower levels. And my reforms will also have a positive effect on individual sports or even other types of injuries, to an extent that will need to be determined by further research. There will be some hurdles, so funding, like for every important large-scale project. We will also have to convince sports governing bodies to surrender part of their authority. It will be hard also to attract sports league, non-Olympic sports, because the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, has authority over Olympic sports only. And for Olympic sports, the IOC could say, okay, if you don't follow these rules, you won't take part in the Olympic Games. but it wouldn't be possible for leagues, sports leagues. And finally, the challenge of sustaining a strong effect. Of course, we don't want window dressing, so we need efficient measures. So my presentation was very short. For further information, so you can have a look at my PhD dissertation, which is now available as a book. There is also a summary of my main findings and proposals available on Medium. It's a very short article, 5-minute read. More detailed presentation is available. I did a presentation for Mercer Marsh benefits last July, so it's 45 minutes. It's more detailed, and my contact details, I would be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for that very detailed, knowledgeable presentation. I think sometimes the best way to get things done is to bring people who are a whole lot smarter than you together, and I really thank her for her different perspective in this discussion. This is one of my lovely patients, Dale Spriggs, who I was really surprised to see walk in through the door of my clinic, because I'd known Dale when I was 14. He used to ride horses for my mother, and he was a top jockey. You know, he won many races and a real champion, and a champion person, as well as his wife Danny, who's shown here. And he really taught me a whole lot more than I knew about the jockeys already. He taught me that they were getting repeated head knocks from the horse's head, that can be around 50 kilograms into them. They were getting knocks in the barriers as well to their head, apart from the falls and apart from just handling these great big animals as well. They get knocks here or there. So lots of repetitive head trauma. And the thing about jockeys is they're very, very tough. They're often distracted by other injuries such as fractures of the arms or legs or other things. And so looking at head trauma, I think, is really important in this group, and encouraging them to come forth for care. So Danny has been, again, a very admirable, courageous spouse who's been there for Dale and helping in any way possible the symptoms that he's experiencing. So the National Repetitive Head Trauma Initiative, how do we go forward from here? How do we kick some goals? Well, I think this is all about engagement, and I'm just so thrilled that we are here engaging together. I think this discussion is really going to change from here. There are multiple stakeholders, of course, government and sporting associations, non-sporting associations, of course, domestic violence, for example. We've got the insurers, thanks to Dean and others. We've got reinsurers involved, the medical community, as well as commercial, and any philanthropy out there. You know, I think this is such a common, pervasive issue of concussion. Now we need to look at that, and also what it means for repetitive head trauma and CTE. So I encourage your involvement, and please contact us if you're keen. The major goals will be in early next year launching a public seminar, similar forum but public, so that we can maybe share some initiatives and ideas with the general public going forward. And in 2022, I foresee that the National Repetitive Head Trauma Initiative will be well and truly up and running. I hope it is, and that we're well and truly into the work of the SNAP CTE study. And I hope there are many other similar projects nationwide to really get to the bottom of this. And beyond that, who knows, maybe there ought to be centres for national repetitive head trauma. So there are lots of ideas that we can pursue, but let's pursue them together. I really want to thank our team here at Macquarie, and also my good colleagues in research, my collaboration with colleagues at University of Sydney, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, La Trobe University, and many others. There are too many to mention, but thank you. We can't do this alone. And I really hope for the future generations that we go forward together. So thank you for listening. Please stay on the line. Dean, we've got some really cool breakout sessions, don't we?
We do, yeah, we do, coming up for you guys. But firstly, I'd like to just thank all of our speakers. I won't run through them because there's plenty of them, but thank you for your time today, and I hope everyone out there enjoyed it. And for people online, apologies for any earlier things. We blame YouTube entirely, and therefore Google.
Yeah, these things happen, don't they? But it's recorded, so you can share it with others and go back and look at these really fascinating videos. So we've got the breakout sessions, we've got the research group hosted by Michael Buckley, and I'll be there. We've got Jenny Batchelor, we've got imaging with Jerome Malla from GE, we've got my sister Virginia, we've got others as well, Synaptic Medical, and we've got insurance, we've got Marsh, and I think we've got Hannah Varee. So stay on the line, come contact us directly or down the track. We'll be putting out some emails and further contacts.
Last thing for me, just to thank our supporters for today who made this possible. So GE Healthcare, Glea Diagnostics, Synaptive Medical, the Australian Sports Brain Bank, Fujitsu, and Men of League, and of course Macquarie University and all their staff that are facilitating this discussion and raising some further awareness on what we can do that and how we can collaborate and move forward.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.